I came home 3 days early and found my daughter's in-laws sitting in my living room. Not a casual visit. Not a friendly cup of tea. Sandra and Jean, two people I had called family for 3 years, were sitting comfortably on my sofa, a thick stack of documents spread across the coffee table in front of them, printed and carefully tabbed in color, every page marked, ready, and waiting for a signature. My wife was sitting across from them, eyes red, both hands folded still in her lap. She didn't look up when I walked in. I had eaten Christmas dinner with these two people. I had stood and watched them cry at my daughter's wedding. I had shaken Jean's hand more times than I could count and called it kinship. Yet through all those years, they had been waiting for their moment. And that day, they had already been sitting in my home for 2 hours, but that wasn't even the worst thing I discovered that afternoon. I want to tell you this story, because I have thought about it almost every day for the past 2 years, and I think it is the kind of story that people need to hear, not because it ends with a dramatic victory, but because it is so ordinary. The way it happened to us, the way it could happen to anyone who loves someone enough to keep the front door unlocked. My name is Neil. I am 61 years old. I have been in construction since I was 19, started as a framer in the summers, worked my way into concrete and foundation work, spent the last 20 years running my own small crew out of Columbus, Ohio. I built things for a living, literally, poured concrete, measured twice. That is just how my brain works. Carol and I have been married 31 years. We bought our house on Stillwater Drive when our daughter Amy was 4 years old, and our second daughter Becca was still in diapers. I have rebuilt that house more times than I can count. New roof after the hailstorm in 2011, new kitchen floor in 2014, extended the back deck twice, because Carol kept finding new reasons to be outside. That house is not an investment. It is not an asset. It is the place I fell asleep, next to my wife, 31 winters in a row. That matters. I had been away for a week, a job in Dayton, helping an old partner close out a commercial build. I came back 3 days early because the weather shut us down, and honestly because I missed being home. I hadn't called ahead. Carol used to say she liked when I did that, said it reminded her of when we were young, and I would show up at her apartment on a Saturday with coffee, and no notice. I had kept the habit because it still made her smile. I thought it still did. I came in through the garage. I always do. Old reflex. You don't track up the front entry if you don't have to. I had my work bag over one shoulder, and I was already planning to make a pot of coffee when I heard the voice coming from the front of the house. High, measured, the kind of voice that takes up space as if it has a right to. Sandra Avance, my son-in-law Tyler's mother. I had known Sandra for 3 years since Amy and Tyler got married in the backyard of this house in June, under the oak tree Carol had planted the spring Amy was born. I had spent 3 years finding reasons to like Sandra Vance. I had not found many. But I had kept trying, because she was Amy's family now, and that was what you did. I set my bag down without making a sound and walked toward the voices. Carol was in the armchair by the front window, the reading chair. She has a book going at almost all times, usually historical fiction, always a bookmark ribbon, always a cup of tea going cold on the side table. There was no book, no tea. She was sitting completely still, both hands folded. And even across the room I could see her eyes were red and swollen. Not recently. She had been crying for a while. Sandra was on the sofa across from her. Her husband Gene sat beside her. Gene Vance retired, formerly in finance, the kind of man whose handshake is a performance. Between them, on the coffee table, was a set of papers, tabbed with colored strips. Several pages. The kind of documents that are printed for a purpose. Neither of them had seen me yet. Sandra was talking. Her voice was patient and smooth, the tone of someone explaining something to a person who is being unreasonable about a simple thing. Carol, she was saying, we've been over the timeline. The bank needs this to move. You're not giving anything up, you're just helping Amy and Tyler build something real. Surely that's worth a signature. Carol said nothing. I stepped into the room. Sandra looked up. Something crossed her face quick, controlled, gone in under a second. Then she smiled. Neil, we didn't realize you were back. I looked at my wife. Are you okay? And I watched her face do the thing that broke something in me right then. Relief. And underneath the relief, something that looked like shame. Which was wrong. Which was completely wrong. She had nothing to be ashamed of. I'm all right, she said. Which was a lie, and we both knew it. I looked at the papers. I didn't touch them. I didn't pick them up or read them. I just looked. "What is this?" Jean spoke then, the way a man speaks when he wants his size to do work in a room. "It's a co-signature loan arrangement. Tyler and Amy are looking to grow the business. The lender requires a secondary property guarantee." We thought, given the family connection, it would be a straightforward conversation. "Secondary property guarantee," I said, "meaning this house, as collateral." "Standard practice," Jean said. "Nothing unusual about it." I looked at my wife again. "How long have they been here?" She said quietly, "Almost 2 hours." 2 hours. I let that number sit for a moment. Almost 2 hours of Sandra Vance's reasonable voice. Almost 2 hours of those papers on the table with their little colored tabs. Almost 2 hours of my wife sitting in her own home with her hands folded in her lap. "I'd like you to leave now," I said. Sandra's smile didn't move. "Neil, I understand this is a surprise, but if you'd just let us walk you through the full picture—" "I understand the full picture," I said. "You came to my house while I was away and you spent 2 hours pressuring my wife to sign something she clearly does not want to sign. Please gather your papers and go." Jean stood up slowly. He was making his height count. "There's no need for that tone. We're family." "You're my daughter's in-laws," I said. "That's not the same thing. Please leave." There was a silence that lasted longer than it should have. Sandra looked at me the way she had looked at Tyler once, at their Christmas dinner 2 years ago, when he had said something she disagreed with, the look of a woman deciding whether a person was worth further effort. Then she began collecting the papers. Slowly. She did it slowly. When the door closed, I sat down on the couch. I looked at my wife. "Tell me everything," I said, and she did. It had started 3 weeks before, on a Tuesday morning when she knew I was on site. Tyler had called her directly. He'd told her the renovation business was in trouble, that they were about to lose a major contract, that there was a financing gap, that it was urgent. He'd asked if Carol and I would consider putting Stillwater Drive up as security, just temporarily, just to bridge the gap. Carol had told him she needed to talk to me first. That was the right answer. But then Sandra had called the next morning, and Jean had called the afternoon after that, and then Amy had called, crying, asking her mother not to make this harder than it had to be. And the calls had kept coming, closer together, with a tone that shifted gradually from asking to assuming. And by the time Sandra and Jean had shown up at the door with their papers, Carol had been worn down enough to open it. She hadn't signed anything. I need you to hear that. My wife sat in that room for almost 2 hours, and she did not sign a single page. But I could see what those 2 hours had cost her. I held her hand while she talked, and I didn't say much. When she was done, I told her she had done nothing wrong, that she had been strong, that I was home now. I didn't tell her yet what I was already beginning to plan. Honestly, if that were me, sitting there for 2 hours, I don't know if I would have held out. There is a specific kind of social pressure that comes dressed as reasonableness. It doesn't yell. It doesn't threaten. It just keeps applying gentle, relentless weight, the way water works on stone, until the stone decides that the path of least resistance is to give a little. I would have wanted to stand firm. I would like to believe I would have. But I understand why someone might not. And I will not let anyone make Carol feel small for having been in that room at all. That evening, I called Lou Breslin. Lou and I had been in the same hockey league for 12 years. He'd retired from real estate law 2 years before, but still took the occasional consult. He was the kind of man who told you what was actually true rather than what was comfortable to hear, which is the only quality that matters in a lawyer or a friend. I described the document as Carol had described it to me. Lou was quiet. He asked whether an independent legal representative had been mentioned, whether we'd been provided a copy of the document, and whether the loan amount had been specified in the paperwork. The answer to all three was no. Lou told me that what I was describing was not consistent with standard lending practice. Any legitimate lender requiring a co-signature arrangement involving third-party real property would require the co-signers to have independent legal counsel. That requirement had not been offered. Combined with the pressure campaign and the timeline, Lou said, the document was likely not what it had been presented as. He wanted a copy. I told him I would get one. The next morning I called Amy. I asked her to come over alone, not Tyler, not his parents, just her. She arrived at 2 in the afternoon. She looked tired the way her mother had looked tired, not from lack of sleep but from carrying something that didn't fit. I made tea, and I let her talk. What came out over the next hour was not the story Tyler and his parents had told. The renovation company had not nearly lost a major contract. It had already lost it 3 months earlier, because Tyler had missed a series of deadlines. The loan was not to bridge a financing gap. It was to cover a debt that had accumulated through the business and through what Amy described, quietly, without looking at me, as a period of very poor decisions. She was still trying to understand herself. The total, as best she could piece together, was somewhere in the range of $90,000. She had not seen the full document. Tyler had told her it was standard. Jean and Sandra had offered to handle the paperwork because, they'd said, they had experience with this kind of thing. I told Amy about my call with Lou. I told her as gently as I could what Lou had suggested the document might actually be. I watched my daughter's face while I talked. I watched the exact moment it shifted. She started crying. Not the soft, controlled kind. The sudden kind. The kind that comes when something you've been almost knowing becomes something you can no longer not know. I let her. I gave her tissues. I refilled her tea. I didn't say anything until she was ready. When she was, I told her I was not angry at her. That I believed she had been kept in the dark about most of this. But I told her clearly that I needed her to be honest with me from this point forward, because what happened next would depend on what was actually true. She told me everything she knew. I reached out to a woman Lou connected me with, Yvonne Ferris, a specialist in financial fraud with a focus on real estate document misrepresentation. I gave her everything Amy had described about the document's language. Yvonne told me the characteristics were consistent with a pattern she had seen before. Not an outright forgery, but a document crafted to obscure the actual nature of the agreement through language that would be difficult for someone without property law experience to parse correctly. She told me that if the document existed as described, there were grounds for a formal complaint with the state banking authority. Then she told me something else. Jean Vance's name appeared in a civil complaint filed 18 months earlier in another state. A similar arrangement. Another family. The case had been settled quietly. No admission of liability. I sat with that information for a long time. I thought about Carol in that armchair. Hands folded. Eyes red. 2 hours of Sandra Vance's reasonable voice. And I thought about the fact that there had been another family, somewhere, before us, sitting in their own living room with their own papers and their own colored tabs, and the Vances had walked out of that situation clean and tried the same thing again. Here's what I want to say about that, and I mean it plainly. There is a particular kind of person who does not experience what they do as wrong. Jean Vance was not a movie villain. He was a man who had spent his entire career building mental scaffolding that turned what he did into something called strategy. He was solving a problem for his son. He had done it before, and the world had not held him accountable. That had simply confirmed his belief that this was how things worked. That is not innocence, but it is something more dangerous than cartoonish evil. It is ordinary self-interest wearing the costume of competence. Understanding that does not forgive it, but it made what came next feel more necessary, not less. I called Amy again. I told her what I had found about Jean. I told her what I was going to do. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I told her the same thing I had told her before, that I was not angry at her, and that she had been used in this as much as the rest of us. The Saturday meeting happened at our kitchen table. I want to slow this down because I need you to feel what this room was like. This was not a courtroom. This was the same table where Amy had done her homework every night for 14 years, where Carol and I had eaten 10,000 dinners, where I had drunk probably 1,000 cups of coffee while reading the morning paper, with no particular urgency. It was a kitchen table in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing dramatic about it. Carol sat beside me. Amy and Tyler came in together. But even then, even walking through the door, there was a distance between them, the way people orbit each other when they have been having too many difficult conversations. Amy sat slightly turned away from her husband, not hostile, just angled away, like she needed a little more space than usual. Tyler looked like he hadn't been sleeping. There were circles under his eyes, and he held his coffee mug with both hands the way people do when they need something to grip. I had Yvonne's preliminary findings in a folder. I put it on the table. I did not open it. I looked at Tyler, and I told him what I knew. I told him about the document's actual legal structure. Not what it had been presented as, but what it was. I told him about the civil complaint in the other state. I told him that Yvonne had already begun the formal process of filing with the state banking authority, and that depending on how the next few weeks proceeded, there was a reasonable possibility this would become a police matter. Tyler looked at the folder. He did not look at me. He said very quietly that he hadn't known the document was structured that way, that his parents had told him it was standard, that he had trusted them. The room was very quiet. Outside, I could hear the wind in the oak tree. I told Tyler that I didn't entirely disbelieve him, but that it didn't change what had been brought into my home, or what had been done to my wife in my living room. I told him that what happened next depended on what he chose to do. If he cooperated fully with Yvonne, a written statement detailing the full history of the arrangement, complete financial disclosure, and a direct conversation with Carol, then that cooperation would matter. If he didn't, we would proceed without it, and the outcome would be harder to predict. He asked what cooperation looked like. I told him. A complete written statement, full financial disclosure, and a direct conversation with my wife, not with me, in which he acknowledged what she had been put through in that living room. He agreed to all of it. If you have ever been in a room where someone looked you in the eye and finally said out loud what everyone already knew, you understand what happened in that kitchen. There's something that goes through the air. Not forgiveness, not yet. Just the particular release of a truth that has been held back for too long. Amy reached over and put her hand over her mother's. Carol didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The meeting with Jean and Sandra happened the following week. I wasn't present. Yvonne was. It was not a social call. Jean threatened a counter-complaint. Yvonne described his delivery as confident, which she said was not unexpected and not particularly concerning given what she already had. Sandra said very little. People like Sandra Vance, I have learned, go quiet when the room no longer belongs to them. The formal complaint was filed that month. The investigation moved the way these things move, slowly and without drama. 4 months later, the state banking authority found sufficient grounds to proceed. 8 months after that, Jean Vance faced a civil judgment requiring full dissolution of the debt structure he had built around the arrangement. The formal record acknowledged that the document presented to my wife had misrepresented the nature of the agreement. He did not face criminal charges. I will be honest about that. Lou and Yvonne and I had all hoped for more. The law found enough for a civil remedy, not a criminal one. That is a frustration I have had to make peace with, and I will not pretend the peace came easily. But Jean Vance's financial reputation in this state did not survive the judgment intact, and 2 other families came forward after our complaint became part of the public record. 2 other families who had been sitting in their own living rooms with their own colored tabs. They came forward because we did. Amy and Tyler are separated now. It didn't happen because of what I uncovered. Amy has told me more than once that the clarity she found during those months was something she had needed, even though it was painful. They are working through things as adults. She is doing well. I am proud of her. The mistake most people make, and I say this with no judgment, because I have been close to making it myself, is believing that protecting what is yours is the unreasonable thing in the room. That the gracious move, the mature move, the family move, is to find a way to accommodate whatever is being asked, even when what is being asked is wrong. The Vances counted on that belief. They had refined it into a system. They walked into homes where people loved someone, and they used that love as a lever. What this story taught me is that wisdom is not the same as compliance. Standing up is not the same as being difficult. And the most powerful thing I did in this entire situation was not filing the formal complaint, not hiring Yvonne, not confronting Tyler at my kitchen table. The most powerful thing I did was walk into my own living room and say, simply, I would like you to leave. That sentence cost nothing. It required no lawyer, no folder, no plan. It only required that I believed, without hesitation, that my home was my home, and that my wife's distress was reason enough. I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want you to sit with it. Is there someone in your life right now who has made you feel like protecting yourself is the unreasonable position? Who uses the language of family, or love, or helping, while steadily asking for something that doesn't feel right? You don't need a perfect plan before you are allowed to stand up. You just need to be willing to start. Carol still has her garden along the south fence. Last spring she finally put in the lavender section she had been planning for years. Kept putting it off, kept finding other things to tend to first. I built her a new raised bed out of cedar that second weekend in May. It took me most of the afternoon, and she stood there with her coffee, telling me I was cutting the boards too short, which I was not. Some evenings we sit out on the back deck and I have my coffee and she has her tea and we don't talk about any of this. Because there are nights when you are simply grateful to be exactly where you are, and that is enough. I am 61 years old. I built my career with my hands and I built my home the same way. And I will tell you the single truest thing I know. The people who want what you have built will always tell you they are trying to help you. They will use the word family. They will use the word standard. They will bring papers with colored tabs and a reasonable voice, and they will sit across from the person you love most, and they will wait. Learn the difference between someone who is helping you and someone who is making themselves comfortable in your home while they calculate the right moment. Come home early. Ask questions. Don't let anyone make you feel that standing firm is the unkind thing to do. I came home early on a Thursday. I am glad every single day that I did. Before I go, I have to ask you something. If you were in Neil's position, if you walked into your home and found that, what would you have done? Would you have stayed calm, the way he did? Or would the anger have gotten the better of you? Drop a 1 inch the comments if you think Neil handled this exactly right, a 2 if you think he went too easy on them, and a 3 if you honestly don't know, because this whole situation is more complicated than it looks. I read every single comment. Every one. And where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely love knowing how far this reaches. And if you or someone you know has ever been pressured into signing something you didn't understand, or felt like your love for someone was being used against you, please share that below. You don't have to give details. Even just knowing you've been there means something. If this story hit you the way it hit me, subscribe and stay close. The stories I bring here aren't about drama for drama's sake. They're about the quiet moments where ordinary people have to decide who they are. I'll see you in the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Columbus, Ohio to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.